Well, let me just welcome everybody here and add my welcome to those that you've already heard today. I do serve as the pastor of this church. Many of you may not have realized that you are in church today. And for those of you, I just want to offer myself as a service. Every month or so, I will have some kind of doe-eyed little girl come with her parents that are little girl, like 20-something, come with her parents that are visiting her from Vancouver or wherever, and parents want to meet her pastor. And so she will bring them up to meet me, and I know the routine because this girl may or may not have ever been in this church, but she wants to convince her parents that this is her place of worship. And so she drags mom and dad and nervously introduces me, and I always say, "Oh, it is so good to see you again. How's your week been?" As if it's only been a week since we've seen each other. So if I need to accommodate any of you and take a photo in front of the cross or in some ways let religious zealot relatives you have back home know that you were in church for 6 hours today, I'm happy to accommodate, yeah? I love what I do. I consider myself very blessed to have a job that I wake up and just can't wait to be a part of. It's not all glorious. There are mundane activities as well. But in general, I wouldn't trade with anyone else except for maybe riding my bike for 3.5 years or whatever that was. But I love what I do. But it does have some occupational hazards, being a pastor. Engaging in normal social conversations. You know, you have that chit-chat. Hey, good to see you. What is your name? James. Good to meet you, James. I'm Brett. And usually that second question, right, if not third or fourth, is, so what do you do, right? And my answer to that question is always like a buzzkill for the conversation. I'm a pastor. And I'm either greeted with like warm accolades worthy of the Pope, you know, like, wow, that is so great, you know, or more often, I can see in their eyes kind of they're planning their escape strategy of how to get out of conversation with me. I can part a crowd like Moses parted the Red Sea, simply by saying, I am a pastor. So I'm not here to be a pastor today, but I do bring that perspective because I consider myself an educator of sorts. What I do in education is very much a niche. The people that come to my classroom do so by choice. There is no certificate involved, no diploma, no graduation ceremony. And so I have some odds stacked against me that the conventional teacher may not. I have to do it on a Sunday when people often would rather be hiking, sleeping, brunching, doing any number of things rather than getting up and going to church. But I consider my role as an instructor, an educator, in my case, a pastor, as something that I take very seriously, I've given my life to, and I'm thrilled to share my angle, my perspective for what that is worth. I love this quote by Sir Ken Robinson from a TED Talk. Many of you may be familiar with it. He says, "Creativity is as important as literacy, and we should treat it with the same status. We don't grow into creativity. We grow out of it. We're educated out of it." And in that talk, which I commend to you if you have time, he basically says we've got to engage on a creative level. I grew up in North America, in the United States, in Texas, and I grew up in a non-religious family. We didn't go to church hardly at all, but maybe once a year, once every other year, my mom, who liked to go occasionally on Mother's Day, would drag us and we would go. And I can remember as a young kid sitting there in that place and thinking, this is obviously not important to my parents, or they would do this more frequently. It is absolutely irrelevant to our lives. It is so boring, I cannot even bear it, and my dad is as bored as I am. And my early views of God, church, faith, and the whole thing were that it was irrelevant, that it was boring, and that it somehow induced some form of guilt. That was kind of the only reason I could conclude that we ever went at all. Fast forward my life, I graduate from university with an accounting degree and decide that I'm going to pursue theology. And I decide, as I'm going to serve in the context of a church, that memory of my early impressions of God, faith, church, and all of that would be my personal mission to undo. Because I didn't think my assessments of church and God were alone. I felt like they represented what the vast majority of outsiders felt was true of the institution of church. That God, faith, church was irrelevant, that it was boring, and that it was full of guilt. And I didn't think that if that message had anything to say at all, that it should have any sense of guilt or boredom or irrelevance to it. And so my mission here is to actually undo all of the baggage that I had as a kid and to create an environment that is creative, to create an experience that is relevant, to teach, in my case, the Bible, in ways that make people think differently, that challenge status quo, that are engaging, if not life-changing. I have as a desire to create a culture of risk. I feel like that is absolutely imperative if we want to have creative learning environments. That we as the instructors, you as teachers, whatever your role may be, that we have to model and be very intentional about creating a culture that is risk-taking. And children are risk-taking. But as we grow, we become more cautious, we become more guarded, we become more aware of this thing that we worship in Asia called face, where we want to preserve outward dignity at all costs. And that means that we usually play it safe and we do not take risks. But creativity only comes when there are great steps of risks that are taken. And I'm not talking about simply financial risks, which our city knows well, but I'm talking about relational risks, to put yourself out there. I'm talking about professional risks. I'm talking about out-of-the-box thinking, risks that are guaranteed that some percentage of them will fail. But if we don't create that environment, if we don't lead people down that path, then we will perpetuate a very safe, guarded, calculated learner that chooses, by our modeling, to simply play it safe. When I arrived at this church in 2001, this was the church bulletin that we produced. You can imagine my horror. This is actually from 2003. Catch that amazing logo we've got there in the middle. This was the church bulletin we passed out to everyone that came, and it reinforced the horror of my early childhood church experience. Just as I suspected, God, church, and faith in Hong Kong and in Lubbock, Texas were the same. They were irrelevant, they were boring, and it induced lots of guilt. I mean, that was horrible. So I thought, this is a small thing. Let's change it. Let's upgrade. Let's contemporize. Let's jump out of the 80s, shall we? And we would eventually get to a church bulletin that looked like this. But that came at great... You wouldn't even believe it, the numbers of conversations and arguments that had to happen to make that happen. Because within a church environment, people are always wanting to honor the sacred cow and always not change and hold on to tradition. And so creativity and change and risk-taking are inherently a problem in a church setting. And so I had to kind of paint a vision for why a little bit more expensive bulletin might actually be worth it. And it might be a small thing, but it represented a big thing to me because it created an environment that said we wanted to be relevant. We didn't want to be boring. This last series, a sermon series we entitled it Laundry. It was taught on the 7 deadly sins found in Scripture. I figured a sermon series entitled 7 Deadly Sins might not capture many people's attention. So we decided, let's call it laundry and washing yourself and looking at these different things. And we took that whole motif and we created a stage with laundromat look. And we passed out magnets to put on people's refrigerators, and we gave interesting, creative approaches to things that people would say, wow, this is worth thinking about. Here's a few of our other bulletins that we have. We did one called Scandalous about all the things that Jesus said that were quite shocking, and we thought Russell Brand made a pretty good Jesus, so we used his face. Another series called Losers, where we used a prisoner motif to profile people that failed in Scripture. Rise Up, Conform No More, we did about a year ago. Here's another one, looking at different meals Jesus had with disciples and others. We took a Jesus Eats diner. Just examples of how creativity, a little display of creativity has gone a long way to change the environment of learning that we have at this particular church. I have this as a mantra: if you're not failing, then you're not trying. That if you're not failing at something, then you are still playing it way too safe. You are way too committed to your own reputation, and you are way too committed to managing what other people think about you. If you're not taking a risk, making changes happen that you fail at sometimes. So if you're not failing, you're simply not trying hard enough. And I really believe, especially in Asia, we need to model the fact that you can fail and still maintain your dignity as a human being. That is the human experience. But most people try to protect and guard and secretly live disingenuous lives so that other people don't recognize failure in them. And they become isolated, separated, lonely souls wandering about. And they deserve more from us. So we need to model that. Not that we plan to fail, but that we plan to take risks, and failure will necessarily happen. One particular sermon I was doing years ago, we were talking about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, these things. And that particular week was gentleness. And by coincidence, we also had a baby dedication that day, where new parents would come up on stage and bring their new child, and we'd say a prayer for this baby, thanking God for this new life. And so I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. So I prearranged with this family to come up on stage, and I took the baby, and as I was walking across the stage, I tripped intentionally, and I threw the baby across the room. Now, it was a doll wrapped up in this thing, right? But nobody knew it was a doll. And I thought, what a brilliant illustration of gentleness, right? My idea was that I was going to say, see, just as you were horrified over the lack of gentle care with a baby, we ought to be equally horrified when our character doesn't reflect gentleness. It was a total failure. I cannot tell you. Women were crying, trauma. There was counselors in the back. It was awful, right? I was like, okay, it was a joke. Baby's okay, right? Ha. No. People were gone. I was like, okay, reel it in. Stop crying already, right? To this day, it was a horrible experience. It was a bad decision. Certainly out of the box, certainly creative, but horrible, right? But we got to do those things. You got to have some failures, because if you're not failing, you're not trying. And so some of those will land right in a sweet spot where you find a place where people respond and they're lit up and they understand and they agree and they're wanting to learn more. And isn't that what we're all about? Is wanting people to learn more. Creativity really helps us in that way. So we can talk a lot about using a variety of methods in teaching, how to integrate different things, and there's others that know education far better than I that can address that. But what I want to mention today is this idea of having a variety of targets, that we not only use different methods, that we not only infuse creativity, tactile learning, and all those kinds of things, but that we also think as we teach to have a variety of targets, because people are complex. They are layered. And so much of what we have done has just been to teach to their heads and to inform their brains. If we think of an individual, this is very simplistic, but if you think of this kind of three concentric circles, with the outside being the body, and then the mind, and then the very core of someone being their spirit or their soul. And the idea worth sharing that I'd like to leave with you is that people are complex. And that we ought to keep in mind that our job as educators is not simply to inform their minds. It's not just to give them information, but it is also to think about their heart. It's also to think about how they feel, what they care about, what they're passionate about, helping them to connect with how they are wired, understanding their personality, and validating that in the educational process. It's to inform their brains, but it's also to reach their affections, to help them identify what they care about, to cause them to care about things. And even beyond that is looking at their soul and seeking transformation, seeking to change lives. That is my mission in life, unashamedly. It is not a hidden agenda, it is a public agenda. To say, I want to change people's lives. Not me, but I want to guide them into an arena in which they think about how their life can change, what choices they can make, what behaviors they can do, what learning they can embrace that will actually not just inform them and make them smarter, but will actually change the direction of their very lives, their values. And that is something that has largely been missed. 51 years ago this month, there was a Supreme Court case in the United States that would outlaw prayer in schools. And that was a good decision. I want you to hear me on that. I'm not here to say we really need that again. I don't think that we do. I don't think that we ever did. But that serves as a metaphor for something far greater. Because 50 plus years ago, when in the U.S. they said you cannot have prayer in schools, it made teachers, at least in that country, wary of the very notion of speaking about the existence of a soul. I remember as a little kid, we couldn't have prayer in school, but we had, please close your eyes for a moment of silent meditation. Did you guys have that? Yeah. I was always like, whatever, I don't know. I'm hungry. That's what I'm meditating on. Right now, I'm hungry. But at that moment, things shifted. And it would be that education then became all about information. And the existence of a soul, of something deeper than a brain and a heart, was something taboo, was suspect, and was even illegal. And so teachers became nervous about even addressing the fact that children or youth or adults, whoever is learning, was more than an accumulation of cells. And so when we talk about multidimensional teaching, I want to suggest that it's not just being creative. It's not just involving tactile learning, great experiences, all those things that are excellent. But it's also remembering that the object, this pupil, the student, is more than what we see. And that he or she has inherent value. I would say that because they are created in the image of God, that they have the imago Dei, the image of God stamped on them, that as flawed or as perfect as they may be, that their performance does not define their value as a human being. It's something called acceptance. It's something called tolerance. It's something called grace that can revolutionize a child's understanding of who he or she actually is. So last thing, transformation trumps information. Seeing lives changed is far better than seeing a kid learn multiplication. Both are necessary. But ultimately, we want to see lives improved and changed for good. And we can be those teachers, those principals, those tutors that actually make an impact, not just on their head, not just on their heart, but even on the souls of the people that we're over. Thank you.